Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I am your host, Brian Scott. Today, I wanted to dedicate an episode on breaking out of self-punishing patterns. I just look back on my own life and I see that I reach those crisis points, those incredibly low points that become transformative. I wouldn't take any of them back, but they were some low points where I had drank too much or something else. It just reached very low points. And have you ever wondered, especially when it comes to self-defeating behaviors, why we must always reach our lowest point before we can make meaningful changes in our lives and in ourselves? What is it about these critical times in our lives that help turn us around, leading to greater self-understanding and its equivalent power? What is it about those moments that transform you? I had a moment where I was shot and I thought I was going to die. That was transformative for me. I had several moments when I woke up after drinking when I said, that's going to be it. Several times when I had just utterly made a fool of myself, completely lost control, blacked out, didn't remember anything. And it took me multiple times, but they scared me. And looking back on it, those moments helped me to transform. So what is it about these critical times? I sort of want to capture it and put it in a bottle and share it with everybody so you don't have to go through a critical time where it feels like you've lost everything in order to transform, because you don't. The Chinese have long defined the word crisis to include the meaning of opportunity. How different this concept is for most of us, especially when finding ourselves unable to outdistance some painful self-pattern about to overtake us. But if we can be courageous enough to take a truthful look at what the actual crisis is, foregoing our habitual reaction of trying to change or escape the conditions perceived as being its cause, then perhaps we can realize just what a great opportunity these unwanted moments represent. Let's begin this study by redefining the word crisis and bravely distancing ourselves from our current meaning of reaching a critical point created by conditions outside of our control. Our courageous new definition will be as follows. A crisis is that telling instant when certain parts of ourselves, having already successfully deceived us, encounter the moment in which their deception is revealed. In other words, the real turning points occur for each of us each time something we believe to be true, to be real, is found out not to be what we had assumed. The financial deal, that special specific person, or some long-term relationship turns out not to be what it seemed. And further, we see that it never could have been what it promised. And it's right here, in the midst of our unwanted revelation, that we must dare to see what only the few and the true are willing to look upon. Our ordinary interpretation of moments such as these is that it's the person or his or her default on a promise that is the cause of what punishes us. But we could never be in this position of going through the crisis of a deception revealed unless there wasn't first a deception concealed. And if you are confused at this point with where I am headed, then add this old familiar expression to your thinking, it takes two to tango. Now, with this in mind, consider the following special truth, for within it is revealed the one true way to rise above finding yourself self-compromised and a captive of unwanted events. To the one about to enter into it, no painful pattern starts as one. Can you see the truth in this finding? Now, each unwanted circular condition of ours always has its beginning in a hope, an expectation, and excitement. How at its outset, the seed of each circle of self seems to be quite different from the bitter fruit it eventually yields. And since it's impossible that the seed of a sweet fruit tree yield bitter berries, we come to our principal lesson. Before we can break out of any painful pattern, we must give ourselves over to the conscious study of its seed and not allow ourselves to be any further deceived by blaming the tree and hating the fruit it now bears. Condemning the unpleasant effects of an undetected cause is like shouting at your own shadow to make it go away while you remain with your back to the light. Breaking out of self-punishing patterns begins with becoming aware of their real cause, which can be stated somewhat like this. Something within you that feels itself to be unsettled or incomplete identifies this unwanted state with something or someone that will, once possessed, provide you with a sense of being whole, complete, and at last in command of yourself. This inner finding is important because we can all see, to some degree, that the seed, the start of some unwanted self-pattern, begins as an undetected thought or feeling of ourselves that instills us with a sense of ourself as somehow being incomplete. Once this false sense of self sets in, the next step fall into place automatically, mechanically, for now it is very clear to us, if we are ever to feel content with who we are, we must undertake the business of completing ourselves. At first glance, this painful perception makes sense. But then again, as we have seen, so does each new deception we unconsciously agree to embrace. This is why we must bring new knowledge into the inner equation. Higher understanding and the power of reason that surrounds it like a halo creates a special form of inner light. It is the dawning of this light that breaks through our painful patterns and that shows us the way out of the circle of self. Here is a piece of the missing knowledge, the seed of truth, needed to change everything. We are not incomplete creatures. We are God. We are not incomplete creatures, at least not in the way our sensual self sees itself. We are, however, unfinished. The difference between these two states of self, as you're about to learn, is immense. In the incomplete view of ourselves as provided for us by our thought nature, we must, compelled by our own findings, seek our own completion or otherwise accept imperfection as our fate. It is a priori, given our incomplete state of self, that the completing factor must lie outside of us, or else why would we need to be seeking anything? So in each new cycle of seeking, we start out hopeful and excited by the idea of finally possessing what will, once possessed, allow us to at last possess ourselves. But near the close of each of these cycles, we find ourselves not the ones who possess some new and rewarding sense of self, but rather the unwilling captives of the very condition we once dreamed might set us free. Now contrast the seed cast from this self and the fruit it bears with any real seed, be it seed of a mustard tree or of true self. Seeds such as these are not incomplete, only unfinished relative to what waits within them, and there is more to this consideration. What real seeds require to develop into their next form, whether sapling, full-grown tree, or self-conscious self, is provided for right within their essential construct, as well as within the very ground into which they are sown. Everything needed to bear fruit is provided. Such seeds are patterned after fulfillment itself, and in their continuing evolutionary cycle, they naturally assist other forms in their ongoing rise toward perfection. Reflecting upon the truth of these ideas is an important part of being rescued from the circle of self-punishing patterns. Here's why. Breaking out of any painful pattern begins with seeing for yourself that any self struggling within you to escape some recurring negative cycle is the same one who, in its search to complete itself, willed this circle into existence in the first place. Only now its idea of feeling complete is wrapped up in the idea of escaping this trap it created. With this discovery in mind, add one last insight. It is a lot easier to fall into a hole than to climb out of one. So stay awake to yourself. Catching and releasing the will of what feels itself to be incomplete before it enacts the intention to go out and find its missing half is far superior to wasting your energy struggling as captive of its creation. However, you should awaken one moment or another and find yourself a prisoner in some painful pattern already in motion. Try to remember, as best you can, to add this bit of light to your awareness of the moment. Neither this incomplete self, its wishes, nor the circles within which it runs to complete itself is who you really are. To know the truth of this is the beginning of a freedom that can never be compromised. Deliver yourself from the domain of dark thoughts. Once we have become conscious of self-wrecking thoughts, how do we know the difference between going into denial about them or otherwise unconsciously repressing them? The only way it's possible to truly deliver ourselves from the punishment of our own self-wrecking thoughts is to begin to awaken to their hidden cause within us. For example, self-loathing is a string of dark thoughts driven by negative emotions based in imagination about ourselves. The secret cause or undetected opposite of self-loathing is an unconscious image we have of being better than what self we detest. So it is not a question of repressing or ignoring self-wrecking thoughts and feelings, as neither of these interactions will free us from the effects of unwanted inner states. Seeing beyond any doubt, or with doubt if necessary, that the thoughts that attack us do so because we have unconsciously agreed to their onslaught is what makes us quit the whole business. In a manner of speaking, at this point in our inner growth, there is no more fun or hope left for us in this kind of suffering. Then suffering falls off by itself, because we find some sort of growth and fun or hope left in the suffering. For instance, I received an email from someone that said, during the night, in recurring periods, I'm assaulted heavily by many inner voices that finally subside by dawn. During certain specific activities like mowing the lawn or showering, I experience similar unwanted moments of feeling attacked. Why are certain times more difficult and other times, such as dawn, so peaceful? Just like there are creatures of the dawn of the day and of the night, so too there are certain eyes that dominate certain times. It's good to start noticing this merry-go-round of misery-making states. Learn increasingly to detect their appearance earlier and earlier, and you will begin dropping them sooner. One maxim of self-development I sense is true is that the way out of any stressful situation is to go through it. Someone asked me, how does this approach apply to reducing stress-producing thought attacks? Everything depends upon our ability to inwardly discriminate between thoughts and feelings that are for us as opposed to those that are against us. Whenever confronted with an onslaught of internal impressions, the most powerful tool you have is to go silent. Step away from the situation inwardly by bringing everything that is going through you into your deliberate field of attention. There is a native unity in a silent mind that is able to both witness and taste the thoughts and feelings passing through it. It is this internal field of silence that reveals the character of any impressions and shows them for what they really are. It's hard to make a mistake when your first wish is to see these thoughts and feelings instead of just unconsciously turning your will over to them. What I've been getting at in this episode is very similar to the episode I had, Turning Dark into a Healing Light. In that episode, I discussed this important point. That is, you may have things you're struggling with, things you're going through, inner negative states. And if you ignore them, they go into the subconscious mind and they program the subconscious. So what we're trying to do is confront these states. Everything depends on our ability to inwardly discriminate between thoughts and feelings. It's hard to make a mistake when your first wish is to see these thoughts and feelings. I have somebody that messaged me saying, I usually feel really good about things and less attached to the conditions around me in my life. However, sometimes I get thoughts on a deeper level that one might never imagine a positive person like me thinking, and they are possibly more negative than anything I thought of before my self-study. And I have had the same thing. I've had these ridiculously negative images that come up that are coming from a deep level. And what I have learned is that don't fight this new awareness. The wrong parts of us tell us that a good person doesn't have dark thoughts. This causes us to resist the state, which in turn breathes life into it. This is how we fall into the hands of negative states. As Neville Goddard explains, we are the state that we're in. When we start to assume these negative states, they become real. It is trickery. Learn to watch everything and judge nothing. Stay quiet. All self-harming states must come and go if you will work at this. Lastly, in the light of these lessons, consider Christ's instruction to his disciples that they resist not evil. Where do all these tormenting thoughts come from that we hear as voices within us? I think if I knew the truth of their origin, they wouldn't overcome me so easily, right? Someone has asked me to shed some light on this mystery of where they come from. Where do they come from? Rest assured that for now, where these voices come from is not important. We may have an understanding they're coming from a number of places, different dimensions, different negative beings. They could be coming from the astral, but it's not important. It doesn't matter. You're attracting these, and when you start to think one thought, you begin to attract other thoughts that are similar to it, other states. Persist with your inner work, particularly working at becoming increasingly conscious of these voices, and something unthinkable will occur. Bit by bit, you'll be able to see into the nature that does not belong to any individual, from which these inner voices of conflict arise. Like all ecological niches, everything has its place. Our place is within the higher life, where these voices either have no consequence or eventually just disappear. Someone else wrote me, I think I must be crazy, but it feels to me as though one part of me wants one thing, for instance, that my husband treat me in a certain way, and that another part of me wants just the opposite, because I criticize him when he does as I wish. How can I get out of this trap? No opposite within us has the power to cancel itself. What this means is that we must wake up and start working to see that it is impossible to release any conflict we may have by running in the direction it prescribes to escape it. As this realization grows, we begin to desire living from the truth within us that already understands that what we really want isn't a new direction in life, but to live from its life. In other words, we must put aside all other concerns besides the one that directs us toward the celestial life. This is the way out. Someone else messaged me. Gradually, I'm beginning to realize that my pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain are the opposites of a single thought. How do I back up and see the whole thing in its entirety so as to be free from this unconscious duality? The understanding of the operation of the opposites is an intellectual act that is discussed by Ra in the Ra material, understanding that every emotion has its opposite. Using reason to try to escape the opposites, to negate them, is just the beginning of the understanding you need. In truth, using thoughts to address the problem of the opposites only compounds their confusion, as thought by its nature can only address one side of a thing at a time. True seeing is not a mental activity. The more you learn about the nature of the opposites and how they are unable to resolve themselves, the more you will naturally step aside from their influences when they enter you. As you step aside, ultimately learning to see your life outside of these opposites, increasingly you'll be able to see them in their original form. There is much spoken about in higher spiritual studies concerning the opposites, and how, for instance, we are unaware that to be for one thing often sets us against something else. My question is this accurate? How does it relate to daily actions and decisions that we must make? The study of the opposites is very important in our inner work, because it is the nature of thought itself to work in dual opposites when you're in third density. These workings are themselves in the scale. The important point to be made here is that truly learning about the opposites requires being able to observe their operation within us, within our thoughts, in the present moment. For instance, all of us recognize the simple opposites of how a fear thought will produce a prescribed action to free us from the fear we feel. All such thoughts and imaginary escapes are really just the work of the unconscious opposites, and we take direction from this level of thought. We remain captives in the circle of self. But perhaps the trickiest of the expressions of these mechanical mental opposites is that thought always divides the person seeing from what he sees. This is a deep subject requiring much study and self-observation. However, it is priceless for your inner development. Someone wrote me, "I find this hard to believe, but it seems that I must like my confusion because I spend so much of my time running around in it. What is it about confusion that attracts me?" Seeing that something in you likes confusion is the first step in bringing an end to it. But we need new knowledge to work with if we are to wish to finally get off this merry-go-round of our sleeping self. Consider this: confusion is really a runaway play of the opposites, where one thought arrives at a seeming conclusion only to be replaced by another thought that calls it into a doubt and then suggests another way to look at the same problem. This complexity is part of the fourth density environment. The higher density photon carries more information. As we experience this complexity. The real problem is that thought nature, whose drive mechanism is the opposites and whose secret intention is to keep alive the false sense of self that this internal dialogue perpetuates. See all of this and then dare to step out of the tornado of thoughts and feelings. You can't find freedom within it. Knowing this helps you step outside of yourself. That's when you become aware of the greater self, the social memory complex. The point and the lesson is to understand that all that is whirling around you inside you when you are confused is the contents of your present understanding. But if the level of understanding could resolve the problem, you wouldn't have had the problem in the first place. Growing to understand the truth of this higher view into the lower states gives you the interior advantage. Learn to act toward any confusion you feel with what you know is true about it, instead of allowing it to draw you into an inner storm that can only perpetuate itself. Step back from yourself, go silent, and wait until the storm passes. It will. And on the other side will be the new understanding, both about what you mustn't do as well as what your next step should be. Question I received: how can I be sure that by becoming silent and silently aware of some negative state of mine, I'm not just secretly repressing this same dark emotion? And I'll say the continual repression of any negative state only serves to make it worse. Any form of resistance only empowers the state resisted. Working inwardly to become silent and watchful is not a form of resistance, but a deliberate act of involving your awareness with the intruder. This awareness will increase your understanding of the state until you no longer have any interest in it, and then it will leave. We are studying states and how to move through states As Neville Goddard teaches us, everything that we're in is a state. Your worst enemy is just in a state. You are in a state, and now I want you to become aware of these states. Somebody said, I find it very hard not to identify with my thoughts. Do you have any suggestions? Many years ago, author Vernon Howard told a small group of students that resistance to the disturbance is the disturbance. This means that any thoughts or aspects of ourselves that we try to get rid of, i.e. the pain and the fear these thoughts cause us, actually keep us unconsciously identified with them. Try this. Instead of trying to push away troubling thoughts, see how deeply aware you can become of what these thoughts are doing to you, what they're causing to occur within you by their very presence. As you become more awake to the actual nature of these conflictive states, you won't want to continue your existing relationship with them. Someone asked me, can you elaborate on Christ's teaching of resist not evil and how this applies to the movies playing in my head? Sometimes I feel like I'm looking at millions of them all at once. Try to see it this way. Instead of concentrating on the various movies or scenes running through your mind, begin to notice the role or sense of identity that you are extracting from these scenes. If you will do that much, you will start to taste something completely different within the whole event. The movies, meaning the thoughts and feelings we have about what we see, are not the problem. Our resistance or attraction, which is secretly the same thing, is what we need to become conscious of. Your awareness and wishing to have the Christ-light life as your own will begin placing you in a new kind of relationship with these internal forces. As you accept this fourth density light, your victory is in this new relationship, not in you trying to extricate yourself from what you see within yourself, because this new light brings out the information. Someone asked me, I can see how thought creates the opposites, especially when trying to control desire. The more I try to control my thoughts, the stronger the resistance. If you do nothing, then nothing changes. How do you get above the opposites? I would only say to that what you must eventually see is that the part of you that wants to control desire is itself but an opposite of that desire you are trying to control. The only way to truly rise above the circle of self, which is what the opposites engender and perpetuate, is to see how certain thoughts and their habitual patterns serve to keep you secretly identified with this nature that is unconscious to and in itself. Stop trying to control runaway conditions and work more at being present to them within yourself. Letting go will naturally follow. The way in which our present mind knows itself and its surroundings is through opposites. This isn't hard to see. Opposites are natural and necessary in the physical world. Up and down, left and right, sweet and sour, all help us to find our way and guide our choices. But when it comes to succeeding in higher realms of reality, in fourth density New Earth reality, and winning their inherent rewards, this same mind, unconscious to its own dualistic condition, experiences certain consistent self-punishing limitations. And that is the point of this episode. To begin with, this mechanical level of mind is only able to see life through the opposites. Republican, Democrat. This means it is in its very thought, action, and perception divided. And this discovery tells the tale. Here we learn that our present level of mind is incapable of grasping anything that is not one-sided. Consider the consequences. For instance, whatever this divided thought nature sees, it sees as being apart from itself. So any situation it looks upon, it views as being separate from itself. The problems inherent in this unconscious act of division are not obvious, although the pain it creates can't be missed. For instance, anytime we don't know the immediate answer to some pressing question, this divided nature naturally concludes that the pain it sees in our heart and mind is there because of the absence of some sorely needed but still missing answer. Once having established this perception as reality, It then seems only natural and obvious for this divided nature to begin seeking this missing answer as the rescuing agent for the pain it perceives. But what this divided mind can't see is that the conflict in its center is actually its own unconscious creation, conceived through its very own undetected divided activity. A slightly deeper and different look into this psychological process will help clear up any temporary confusion. There are times when we drive ourselves crazy looking for answers to questions when no such answers exist, at least as conceived by that level of questioning mind. For instance, a frightened mind may ask what it can do about a scary situation, hoping to find an answer that will make it unafraid. This divided level of mind can't see that whatever it has imagined will empower it to become fearless. A new mate, more money, or enhanced social status only secretly increases its level of dependency and therefore its fear. So whatever solution it finds serves only to increase its own already agitated state. Let's take another example. Maybe this same level of divided mind asks what can be done to get even with someone, as in wondering the best way to exact revenge. What this nature can't see is that its very own consideration of how to make someone else suffer only increases its own anguish, and that the real answer it needs is to be found within a higher, more compassionate view that it can't hope to arrive at because this level of mind is unable to see both sides of anything. For instance, how the transgressing party in question might have acted unthinkingly without really wanting to have made anyone suffer perhaps, and most likely was driven along against his or her will by the underground pressure of some personal pain too great to resist because of the state that they're in. But you can't be saying that, someone says, just because our present mind works in opposites, there is no answer for our pain. No, not at all. Only that there are some questions for which no answers exist because the level of mind in third density that poses these questions is unable to grasp that it is the pain it feels when posing them. How can there be a question that has no answers? Let me see if I can show you. Whenever we get a stomachache, our internal distress begs us to ask ourselves the question, what did I eat to upset me? Clearly, for this question, there are answers, and should we realize our misstep and proceed to obey our findings, the unwanted discomfort goes away. But in this example, both our pain and solution are physical in nature, which makes finding the cause and correcting the conflict a fairly easy task. However, in the subtler realms of our own psychic system, not everything we think we see is so clear-cut. Let's look for just a moment at the familiar pain of anxiety or fear, psychological pain such as these incite us to ask, what should I do about this unhappy moment? But as the facts are about to reveal, it is this question itself and any other like it which helps to produce and perpetuate our pain. Now, I can't be suggesting that questions we ask to resolve our aches actually cause aching. Is that possible? In most cases, definitely. Our normal way of dealing with pain is to ignore it until we can't any longer, at which point this mounting pressure drives us to ask ourselves those familiar what can be done about this questions, our perception being that coming upon the correct answer to the cause of our concern will eliminate the ache being felt. But the truth is, regardless of our short-term victories over these anxious states, they always return. Unquestionable evidence that in turn reveals two other important facts worth our consideration. It proves that our present solutions to our stresses are not real. It shows that we have somehow misread the problem. And so what have we missed seeing is that are some questions which actually create the pain they seek to soothe. And the questions such as these have no real solution outside of being able to see them as false. A good example of one of these conflict-creating questions that has no solution at the level of its origin is when that all too familiar thought pops up on the mind screen and asks, what should I do with myself to make my life more meaningful? Consider carefully the details that follow. Until the moment this what should I do with myself thought popped into your awareness, you were not feeling anxious about yourself. But with this thought of how you might remake yourself in your own eyes, that same thought's invisible shadow, the fear of not being able to succeed as you have imagined. Now watch closely as the pain in this fear takes center stage. So does your certainty that you must have an answer for it, which in turn only serves to drive the question wheel of worry around and around. And guess who's stuck behind the wheel? The good news is it doesn't have to be this way if you can stay awake to yourself. But before we go any further, let's remember that this special form of studying ourselves is not about analyzing our pains. No, this approach is doomed. We don't want to think about our stress state. What we want to do is to see these negative states as they come into being within us, as the following insight helps to reveal this difference between seeing our states and thinking about them is significant. One of the favorite tricks of this false nature is that the pain it gets you to think about is itself being caused by trying to figure out what to do about it, which also explains why, at least in these internal realms, the more clearly we can see into the operation of this divided, conflict-creating nature, the greater becomes our freedom from it. Now, let's sort of summarize what we've talked about so far. If you don't feel disturbed until after some question appears in your mind, then it's that question which should be held suspect for its part in creating the conflict you feel. The key to freedom here is in being able to realize that this ache has no answer, since the pain now pulsing within you never had a life of its own until that question, whatever it may be, breathed it into existence. That is how it worked. The thought can immediately create the pain in the fourth density existence that we are now in. This cycle of sorrow is not unlike the sailor lost at sea, who unknowingly or from sheer desperation drinks salt water to quench his thirst. The more he drinks, the greater his thirst grows. Madness usually follows, unless rescue and fresh water come first. This analogy is especially fitting because the truth has been long compared to fresh, clear water. And so it is here that we must be willing to let what is true to be our guide, instead of mechanically trying to answer these conflict-creating questions at their level, which is to seek out one futile and false solution after another. We must dare to see into and finally through that divided nature, asking these kinds of questions. Our new and conscious answer must be to drop both our worried concerns and that sense of self that these conflict-creating questions temporarily create. I can see the wisdom in these insights even if I don't fully understand them, yet still, where do these conflict-creating questions get their beginnings if my pain isn't their cause? Don't be concerned with this for now. Why worry about how to dive underwater when you're just learning to swim? In time, with sincere study and a growing, quiet mind, all will be revealed within this new fourth density earth environment that you find yourself within. Let's just say these conflict-creating questions can get started by any number of possibilities. They can include having their beginning in yet some other undetected pain, as perhaps born from the activity of unconscious associative thinking, such as when you see a new suit of handsome clothes in an upscale store window that you then unknowingly compare with what you have on that day. In a heartbeat, you find yourself feeling terribly unfit and desperately inadequate. The next thing you know, you're asking yourself, what is wrong with me that I can't seem to get ahead? What do I have to do to be the winner? And in less than a heartbeat, the wheel of worry starts rolling along and you're under it, not steering it. Of course, there are many more examples of conflict-causing questions that the divided mind can pose but not solve. For extra benefit, try to identify some of those more familiar questions that have you running nowhere fast. Just get started. Everything that you do to help yourself stay awake will also help to erase the ache of these conflict-filled questions that have no answers. You can break from these self-punishing patterns when you become aware of your thought process and the opposites that they create. And you can resolve these as you become the neutral observer. In this environment, it's so important that you do that. We all create patterns. that are self-punishing all the time. From the moment that we wake up to becoming addicted to the fear and worry, and even addicted to anger. There are chemicals that are created in our body with these emotions, and they become feedback loops where we actually need that spike in chemicals that come into our body. And then it creates the state. You must be ruthless in the states that you become aware of. And as you become aware of these states, face them down. Don't ignore them. Don't push them away. Don't try to escape from them. Face them down. And as you simply observe them, you don't have to learn anything from them. Just observe them. Don't ignore them. They will slowly go away. By pushing them in the subconscious, they'll pop up again. They keep on popping up. These things will pop up more and more in a fourth density environment. So you must face your shadow. You must face the darkness. And you must break these punishing patterns. And you will find the light. And I want you to go about doing that and be aware, in awe of the major transformations that you're making. They can simply change your life. You don't need to experience a crisis or something terrible in order to justify your movement and awareness to another state of higher thinking in this complex, complicated, fascinating environment where everything seems to be getting more complex all the time. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.